right. Hi, JoJo. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here after listening for a little bit.
Yeah, so you said a friend introduced you to the podcast?
Yes, a friend of mine sent me one of the episodes on one of the days I was really frazzled, and I was like, wow. And then I kept listening to it until like 1 in the morning. Like I listened to so many episodes, and everyone kept reaffirming a part of me or something that happened to me, and it was so affirming to hear those stories. So
Yeah.
I got in touch with you, and I wanted to tell my story too.
Oh, well, I'm so glad you did. I feel like I have a lot of questions about your unique perspective, but also wanted to hear about the first your diagnosis journey. So you self-diagnosed first in 2021. What was going on in your life specifically? You said you had seen a YouTube video. Was there something specifically happening that kind of made you really think, okay, I need to look into this?
Well, you know how it is. We always go into a tangent. So it was actually the year before that, while I was finished closing up my grad school thesis and submitting it, I realized how much more difficult it is for me to write or to edit my work. And so I told my graduate advisor how many systems I have just to produce a clean copy. Like I would have Grammarly check my spelling, and then I would print it out and track it with a pencil, and then I will have a speech to text read it back to me. And so I had like these 5 different systems just to provide a clean copy. And she was like, my God, that you work so hard. Like and that kind of took me on a journey of discovering that I have dyslexia, and I tried to get diagnosed the traditional way through like local, but they had like 10 months to be seen and thousands of dollars. And I'm like, I've been living with this so long, so I looked online and found a program that did similar. And then not only was I confirmed to have dyslexia, but it was also dyscalculia they call it. I can barely count, and dysgraphia, which was affecting my writing, which is why I had so many systems. And one of the questionnaires was asking me, do you have ADHD? And I quickly crossed out no, you know. And because I worked in medicine for 10 years, right, as an medical interpreter, and I would be in the room with parents and their little energetic kids who are like bouncing off the walls, and they would be like talking about ADHD, and I'm like, that's really not me. So I never thought I had it, you know? And I just kind of like, so when a year later in 2021, in April, I was just sitting taking a break, and the algorithm suggests this video. It was uh, it was titled, "This is what happens to women with ADHD left undiagnosed." And I'm like,
Mm.
okay, let's check it out. And this girl proceeds to tell my whole story in that 10 minute, I think it was 14 minutes. She was like, she talks about emotional dysregulation, which is a word I never had. I'd never heard that word for what I felt like,
Mhm.
just feeling so thin-skinned and feeling always every like being awake in the middle of the night, rethinking a conversation that happened early in the morning, like so like she had words for experiences I had, and so it was like I was on break. The rest of the day is a blur. I don't remember what else I did, what I thought about, but I just kept playing in my head. It kept playing in my head. And so later when I went home, I went online and I looked for this list. I said, so what are the true signs that somebody has ADD? So I typed women with ADD online, and it gave me like this 24 questionnaires, right? Like that you checklist. And so I turned on the highlighter function on Google Google Doc, and if I have it, highlight, I highlight. Do you forget things? Do you always lose things? Um, it was so many, every question, by the time I did all of them, I had like 22 of them highlighted and 2 of them left. And so I was
Wow.
like, I didn't know. I didn't know what to do. I could not stop thinking about it. Like it just, my whole childhood clicked into place all the challenges I've ever dealt with, kind of like this is a thing that I was actually experiencing. And and for me, it's like I fought really hard with myself to appear normal, to appear successful. Like I was going to grad school, I was having jobs, I was keeping calendar. On the outside, I appeared quite neurotypical, like someone who was like, but on the inside, I was frazzled. I was always like motor firing. I was always like, I was extremely insecure. I felt like an imposter. And so it's just so difficult for those two things to clash and finally to have a name for what it was.
I know, right? Yeah, I feel like that was such a game changer for me when I took the self-test specifically for women, when I realized that a lot of the questions were based around shame, around, sort of this idea that there's this public version of you and then this private version of you that nobody knows about, right? And that you're going to get found out. And I found, talking about imposter syndrome, I found your poem online, Imposter, which was so moving and just really like spoke to that sense, right? Where I'm just going to read it because I'm otherwise I'll butcher it, but where you just said, what you don't know is the fight that goes on in someone's head when they don't feel they deserve good things, when their every thought is wait till they find out who you really are, or surely they'll know soon enough that you are messy, disorganized, weird, unskilled, lazy, not worthy. Insert any other crushing self-critical thought that pops up. And it just, speaks to that. Right, that feeling of just, that you're fooling everybody or somehow. And, where does that core shame come from? I think that's what we try to figure out. At least, I've tried to figure that out with my guests too, right? That the core shame that kind of comes alongside with perfectionism and the, need to really work so hard to show up, and be a good person and all of that. So anyway, that was such a that really hit me, that poem. I was like, oh, that just like absolutely captures that idea. And then also realizing that not everybody feels this way. I think that was the thing that was so profound for me with the diagnosis, when it started really speaking to like my soul when I was learning more about ADHD, and then also realizing, oh, this isn't a universal experience.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think the shame, I always try to figure out where the shame come from. I feel like it's just the constant comparison you get as a kid in schools, like why can't you be like so and so, and all the complaints teachers write about you, like I think one of my teachers wrote when I was in the first grade, wrote to my mom that he has this many students, and if you compare them, put JoJo on a scale, she's more trouble than all of them combined, you know.
You're kidding.
And my mom was mortified. She still tells the story to me. It's because I couldn't sit still.
Yeah.
I was so energetic. I was always raising the hand and then not waiting to be picked. Like hand would go up and I would speak it. So I had this like I was really going as a kid. Like I could not sit still, and I was always distracted by other kids. So I would insist that I be sat on the front so I don't have to see all the movement of kids, you know.
Hmm.
And so all these self-advocating I was doing for myself, like refusing, like if some kid sat in my spot, I would be like, it'll be a fight before class started. I'm like, teacher, I have to sit right here, you know. And and so it was all of that combined. And so when I hit around 12, 13, I started to self-monitor and manage myself and be like, no, no, no. And then I started to watch other kids who appear neurotypical, kids who like get their homework done on time, and kids who were doing things the correct way. Uh, and then copying them, and then suppressing my urge to speak up, my urge to move and wiggle around. And so a lot of my energy would go to focusing in classrooms, which really impacted my schooling. And so all that shame, it's just like trying to pass for normal takes a lot of energy. And so, and by normal, I don't mean like we are abnormal. I'm talking about what society deems as this is the normal kid, and versus you who's like out there daydreaming when half the class, lesson goes by. So it was that struggle, I feel like, to me that made me feel like there's something not right about me that I always have to edit and correct and perfect. And so
Yeah.
I got really good at it, but then as an adult, I find out like I don't really know who I am. So I had to, through this diagnosis, get to really know what I like, what I don't like, what bothers me, all these things. So that's the beautiful thing about knowing is like now I get to be me. Like my mask came out, and my siblings are shocked how different I am, you know.
Well, even just this idea that a teacher would call you a troublemaker because you have your hand raised and you're curious and you're excitable and you want to participate, like that those qualities in a child are considered are labeled as a troublemaker is just insane to me. Yeah, it's
Absolutely, yeah.
right. It's just so profoundly wrong. Okay, so I want to hear about, this because one of my pet peeves is when people say, oh, they roll their eyes and think, oh, everybody thinks they have ADHD because they saw one TikTok video or one YouTube video. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. That was the catalyst that led me to look over my whole life through this new lens, right? It's such a profound experience, and it drives me crazy that people just roll their eyes and shrug it off like you just sort of, lost your keys once and decided that you had ADHD. So I wanted to hear, was your diagnosis, when you were professionally diagnosed, was it a relatively easy experience, or did you feel like you had pushback?
Oh my. So, yeah, a lot of people say that they have ADD, and there's a lot of things that can impact the person's attention, like going through a depressive episode can affect your attention paying abilities. And a lot of illnesses can mimic ADHD or cause inattention. Like if you're extremely anxious, you have a hard time paying attention. So
Even
my
COVID
ADD,
has COVID has some similarities. Yeah.
yes, long COVID actually does affect, people in the similar way. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think for me, my process took like several months and lots of doctors visits. I saw like three different doctors. So when I got that initial like YouTube video I watched, and I look at that checklist of questions, I I'm a woman who worked her like for 10 years in medicine. So I knew how easily dismissed women's complaints were, especially when they come complaining about like their mental health, especially if they appear like capable people with functioning careers, like and like graduate degrees, and they certainly come to you and say like, oh, I think I have ADHD. Like doctors would easily dismiss them. So I went armed. Like I collected all the stories from my early childhood, and then I collected my later years, how I experienced life. Not only that, how other people experienced me. So I came with a checklist of everything. So I can say that ADHD is not something that just comes or props up. It's something that, like, from early childhood to now. Like, I was extremely sensitive kid. Like, I cried, like, from the smallest comments. Like, I was so, so sensitive. Um, like, I had physical symptoms, like I was very uncoordinated. Um, I, so I have dyslexia, which is another co-occurring thing. And so I came ready to defend, but my doctor was an amazing woman. She was like, yeah, I have family members who have this. They're highly accomplished and they struggle. So I'm going to send you for the test. And then my next doctor, she had a long list of questionnaires because I'm a person who came from like turbulent early childhood. I come from Somalia. There was war there. We had to flee for our life, so they had to do a lot of trauma checklists to eliminate that it wasn't trauma, and to eliminate like if it was like chronic depression. So they had to do all these other things as professionals. But what really proved it was when I took the actual ADD test, the one where you answer questions and do exercises and all these things. I passed that with flying color. I think that's the highest I've ever scored a test, you know. And so all of it together was able to verify that I, in fact, had ADD. Did I wish to have it? No, I wished it was something else. So it could be like maybe managed much easier, like nobody wants to have a brain that's wired to be sensitive and wired to always struggle to remember and to struggle to keep a household and things like that. And nobody wants that. But it was affirming to know that's what it was, that I had a name for it, and that I can stop beating myself up and comparing myself to neurotypicals.
That's so beautifully said, right? Nobody wants to just casually have this label as an excuse for laziness because we have dealt with the label of laziness our whole life, right?
Yeah.
And dealt with that. Yeah, that's so beautifully said. Thank you. But but I looking back, so how old were you when you did come here, when you
I came
migrated to the
here,
US?
I just turned 16 when I came to the United States. Yeah. So, and then when I was diagnosed, I was 35. So, no,
Wow.
36. So it's like a while before I got diagnosed. Yeah.
So, what were some of the ways that you sort of distinguish between childhood trauma and ADHD? What are some of the ways that you've reconciled it in your own mind? Because it's a theme that I explore a lot in this podcast. I experienced childhood sexual trauma, and so I feel like I'm always questioning, was that is that what are how does trauma relate to how my brain developed, and it is such there's so much overlap, and it does seem very confusing to me. So I just feel is there a way you've reconciled it in your own mind in terms of your own migration experience?
For me, I've always suppressed that there was trauma because, I've always kind of dealt with life through laughter. And so it took a long time to even know that how I deal with life is from my traumatized background. So it's um, somebody once said that being traumatized is like responding to the present with your past memories. And so it's something there that I definitely would need to deal with. But I was recently reading Gabor Mate's book on ADHD. It's called Disorganized Minds, ADD,
Scattered
and how to
minds.
treat it. I'm not
Yeah.
exact. Scattered minds, yeah.
Hmm.
So he really talks a lot about epigenetics, you know, and how even in utero, a child can experience what the parent is going through. And when they're born, he talked about the brain wiring of a ADHD child or a sensitive child, he calls it. So when a sensitive child is born, they actually, he said, think about it like having like a burn or a scalding on you, like if you touch a normal part of you with your hand, it's fine. But if you touch a part of you that's burned and the skin, the nerves are closer to the skin, you immediately go, ow. So a sensitive kid is wired in that way. So everything they experience, they're traumatized because they're very attuned and they're emotionally open. And so they can become way more traumatized than other kids who could go through the same events. So there's a nurture component to it and a nature component to it. Parts of wiring that you come into the world with it, like sensitively wired, and then experiences affect you much more because you are a sensitive, both physically sensitive, like how we're always annoyed by tags and tight clothing. We're also like emotionally sensitive. We're always reading way more into the room. So that exposure kind of doubles everything for this kind of child.
I know, right? Yeah, and that's something I talk about with my kids, especially. Yeah, so we've been talking about this sort of sensitivity, right? And that idea of we talk about I call it the too muchness factor, where where we suddenly like you'll I'll be reading an article about the homelessness in a city or something that's sad but relatively contained, and I will take that and then go from like 0 to 150 in my emotions because it'll just snowball out of control for me in terms of my emotions, where one thing that feels out of control and hopeless will suddenly become like this huge thing where I start thinking about how much is out of control in life and how the environment and politics and race and everything, where I'm just like, it becomes I get overwhelmed by the too muchness factor, and how it's like, and I think that has to do with like inability to filter information, right? Which is something that we struggle with ADHD, which is like everything sort of feels important, everything feels urgent. The same thing happens when it comes to emotions and just getting so overwhelmed by things. So I guess that comes back to this idea of like when you are sensitive, when you have sensitive wiring to begin with, like you said, everything feels traumatic. Parenthood feels traumatic. Baby crying feels traumatic, right? All of these experiences that we've had over the course of our life feels so much worse. And then again, it goes back to this idea of like, I didn't realize everybody felt, that this wasn't a universal experience.
Yeah, I think, yeah, knowing that, like, like this is not how everyone feels all the time. For me, like being extremely anxious by the news, like I stopped watching the news. I left Twitter because it's just like so much bad news and so many terrible things happening, and it was making me feel hopeless and feel like the whole world is pressing on me in a very negative way. And just the way the clickbaity, the way that the news comes, like breaking news, urgent matters, things getting worse here and there, so all of that feels very urgent. We respond to it with a very urgent way. And so it was very triggering to just go through, like, January 6th, for example, like that kind of brought back actual war memories for me. And is that my sensitive wiring, or is that my trauma, or does it even matter at the end if you're experiencing what you are experiencing?
Mm-hmm.
Putting a label on it becomes less important than dealing with actually what it is. So I will have sometimes friends who would argue with me, say, but I think it could be trauma. And I'm like, well, you know that kids with ADHD are more susceptible to trauma because of how sensitive they are. But then how do you know which it is? So all of these things.
I know,
Um,
right? And that's the other thing. I feel like, oftentimes when I get a psychologist or a psychiatrist on the podcast where I'm like, okay, let's get to the bottom of this. I want to find out once and for all what this is. And then, often I'll be met with like, does it really matter? At the end of the day, these are the traits that we deal with, is executive dysfunction, all of that stuff. Like that's the reality section of part of it where I'm like, yeah. But, but I think it matters to me so much because the label of ADHD was such a profound experience, right? It was so life changing to know that there was a name for this and that there was a reason behind this, right? The big why behind so many of these behaviors that confounded me so much of my life. So I'm like, the label is important. Like, and that's the thing that I feel like a lot of medical providers don't understand is how important it is to define this in a way that is meaningful to people and
mhm.
not just be like, oh, well, I guess I'm just can't get my act together. But anyway, that's a whole other side tangent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I do feel like, for me, having a label for it helped me understand my life much more. Like, and I understand better, like, why big social gatherings bother me and drain me. I understand why when I have words like now burnout, which usually we used to apply to like professionals who are grinding, but for us we can easily be burned out. So when I feel like I don't want to get up 2 days in a row, I start to examine what's going on. I'm like, yeah, I feel like this situation, this matter is burning me out. So I kind of uh, schedule my life in a way that prepares for me to have a day where I just physically can't move, and and not feel shame or guilt about it. Before that, I would be like, well, what's wrong with you? Why can't you get up and do things? So
Hmm.
now it's like it's built in. So today's today. Today's the day. We just lay around and do nothing. And I take away the labels of lazy, of of like someone who's wasting away. Before that, I used to be like, I have this so many opportunities that's not available to people who came from where I came from, and I'm wasting it. And that left me with a lot of survivor's guilt. And now I just with kind of dealing with it in a way that's much gentler and much kinder, um, and not holding myself to standards that are impossible for even neurotypicals, you know. And and also having ADHD makes it difficult for a person to estimate how much time and energy things take. So we always like volunteer to do too much, and then we can't estimate like this would take this many man hours. It's impossible for me to think with my time blindness ever consider things happening and how many increments of time it will take, how much energy it will take, how many like so starting my many ventures and it's really cute, like, and like how we are like always infused with energy, and we just run off and start a thing, and we stay up till 3 in the morning every day for weeks to end, and then we come up with this product and this business adventure and all these things. But we don't work like other people work. We work in fits and starts, and so I have to adjust myself to catch when a fit is coming. You just kind of lay down, and then when a start is coming, just grab onto it and take advantage of that.
Ride the wave. I know, right? Yeah. And to realize, and I think that's what's been so helpful to me too, which is that realizing how cyclical my energy is, so that when I am down, I can, like you said, I can have grace with myself that that's a recharging moment, because I will have it come around again where I will get into a crazy fit of hyper focus, and then I can ride that wave and feel like it's contained in a way. So that was the other thing when you were talking about like things that you can take care of yourself now, like boundaries, even, right? Like boundaries. I always thought boundaries were around things you didn't like, but I also realized that boundaries are important around even things I do like, because I get super excited about a lot of things. And sometimes I have to rein it in and have boundaries even around that, because I can't get out of my own way sometimes.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious. So is your mother in the U.S. or is she back in Somalia?
My mom and a lot of my siblings are in Michigan, so we all came together.
Oh, okay. So she is here. Okay, I think because I was reading another one of your poems about about your mother, and I was curious if she stayed here. So it's another beautiful one too. I'd love to put a link to it in the show notes too, because it's really
Thank you.
sweet. And very moving. But I'm curious from her perspective, or even just the Somali perspective. What is the perspective on ADHD or even mental health? What did she think about this diagnosis?
We sort of like, because of there's not a language that's with a lot of mental health illness in our community. There's not positive language, to explain. It's usually symptoms. A friend of mine and me, we were doing a lot of work to destigmatize mental health conditions and treat them like they are physical ailments. Like if you have a diabetes, you're not gonna have a language surrounding it that's very disrespectful to the person suffering from it. So, because of that limitation, it's like very limited things I can discuss about that condition. But I was explaining a lot of the symptoms, and she was kind of, when I was filling out the paperwork, she was kind of filling in the stories of my early childhood years, like how I used to lose all my pencils every time, and it was so like it was really hard to afford education for a kid, when we were back there. And so she would always, I would lose my pencils, my books, everything. So it was, and how, but she also recognizes how like I'm more creative and more outgoing than my siblings, and how I'm like quick to handle problems. So for her, she experiences me in a holistic way,
Mhm.
and not just like focusing on like the individual negative things, which she finds just as annoying as I do. But she also recognizes like I'm super creative, and I'm always like the problem solver in the family. But her favorite symptom for me, when I was talking to, what do you like most about me? She said, you forget so easily, you can't even hold grudges. And that would be true. Like I would leave the room mad at somebody and then come back 20 minutes later because I was looking for something, and I'm like asking them, "Hey, where's that thing?" So, yeah.
I
But
know.
you were
Oh, go ahead.
asking about how mental, like the word for it is not even, doesn't even exist. But there's a word for it, like to describe like being for that, which means sort of being light, and it's a negative connotation for like being even as a female, being a loose woman or something like that. So,
Oh, okay.
so the you know the so that work still definitely needs to be done. um, but I feel like as a society, Somalis are wired to like the Somali lifestyle is set up um, for ADHD persons really well, because of the timing. There's no strictness about time, you know, like everything happens between the different prayers, like the 5 prayers. So they'll be like, let's meet between Duhur and Isha, or between Maghrib and Isha, or something like that. And there's like 4 or 5 hours in between. And so if you come later than like nobody's gonna hold a grudge against you. So it's, and also like being a person with ADHD, like having a problem sleeping, you know, at night, or staying up way too late, that's fine because there's a siesta in the middle of the day between 1 to 3, nothing happens, so you can catch up on your nap hours. So I feel like, and my friends and I, we really discussed this, like back, like how would we be, what the lifestyle back home is like, much more relaxed and not much more like like you have to do this, be driven, like, and be constantly attached to a job that starts at a specific hour. So things being more fluid, we always talk about how easier it would be to live there with our conditions. Like the lifestyle is much more it's like geared towards the ADD mind. So yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense, right? And I feel like, when we talk about is this a disorder even, because it's so pathologized, and it's like really it's just a matter of being in certain environments that are either helpful or you're in environments that are hostile. And so a classroom is often a hostile environment for children. And so especially ADHD children are, and like you said, like I feel like I have that conversation a lot about this capitalist Protestant work ethic and the drive and sitting at a desk from 9 to 5, like all of these ways in which environments can be super unhelpful to an ADHD brain. But yeah, if you're in an environment where it's totally geared toward you moving at your own pace and following your cyclical energy and having a more just laid back mindset around kind of who you are, then yeah, it wouldn't even feel like a disorder. Why would it?
Yeah. Yeah. You know how they also say that, the farmers versus the hunters.
Yeah.
Yeah, Somali lifestyle is more geared to like, taking care of animals. Is very like animal herding kind of culture. So it's always being on the move, moving from one place to another, taking care of animals. That's the old lifestyle. And so when we moved into cities, we also have this more relaxed way of the shop would open in a few hours, and there's no specific hours on the door, and you just wait around and you just like things happen when they happen. Um, yeah. So, and I it just, I don't think, ADD would be like it's, and you're right, the environment meaning everything. Because for me, when I lived with my family, I never thought I had issues with ADD. It's just only when I relocated to Minnesota, and started running a household did I realize, hey, like, my family really helped me. Like, for example, I was driving a whole entire year with expired license tags, and my mom every year used to remind me to renew my tags, and also keep an eye on my insurance, and like like the issues about struggling to do laundry. I never used to do laundry. I used to always sneak few things with my sisters here, and then another one would do laundry, so I was sneaking a few things with her. And over time, they just kind of accepted and did my laundry for me, and I did the things I liked. Like I loved cooking, so I did all the cooking. I hated dishes, so my sisters did the dishes. So it was sort of like that collaborative and environment was much more helpful to my ADD. Um, and also my mom keeping track of all my paperwork. Like as soon as I lived here for 1 year, I lost all my legal documentation, like every one of them, like my passport, my resettlement paperwork, everything. Like I did not exist, you know. It's just all erased, which was extremely anxiety provoking
Yeah.
when, there was all those Islamophobic talks. Like I was like, wow, I can't even prove I'm legal now. So it's just like, it's because like my mom kept track of all those papers for me. Like, so yeah, it was just so difficult. And that's what took me to this diagnosis, is that I was like, wow, I'm struggling more than usual. I, I
Hmm.
I don't think everyone goes through this, that they always forget to do things or lose track of things. you know.
Yeah, but at the same time, you were able to recognize that like it takes a village, right? Like there's certain things that other family members are good at, and there's certain things that you're good at, and together you make a whole, and it's a wonderful kind of copacetic relationship. And I think sometimes, especially as women, because of how we're socialized, I think so many times we feel like we have to be good at all the things, and then if we're not able to do certain things, rather than ask for help, we just get down on ourselves because we can't figure out how to be good at everything.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. That's why women suffer in silence. Men are good at just being themselves in every situation. So if they want to stim, they will stim. If they want to be loud, if they're impulsive, they'll. But for us, we just suppress ourselves so much that we reach a point where we don't know what we're feeling because we just kind of mask our emotions so much to just appear as others expect us to, and that pressure can just really drag someone down, which is why a lot of women in their 30s and 40s discover that they have this condition because it becomes too much to contain all of that for those many decades, you know.
Right. Well, I think it also is about obedience too. Like my other theory is that the reason why women are more likely to get diagnosed well into adulthood is because we're just tired of being obedient. Like we're
Yeah.
just like, I'm done. Right. And so that's why I always come back to that where I'm like, is this ADHD or am I just an angry feminist who's just sick and tired?
You're like, we've had enough of that. Yeah,
Right.
I
I
think,
know.
yeah. It could be that too. I felt like I feel in my 30s, I feel more comfortable speaking my needs than I did in my 20s. My 20s was just hitting all the targets that I was supposed to, like be finish school this year, which took me, by the way, it took me nearly 10 years to finish my undergrad. I dropped out twice. Um, and and all of that is I was silently struggling. And when I graduated, I left with enough credits that I could actually have 2 degrees, you know. So
Hmm.
it's all of these things come together, and that's when you discover, like, you know, um, this is not how, like, you come to, I think for me, the big part is just grieving the picture I had for myself because I pictured, I always was reading self-help books. Like I read over 13 self-help books to just this time I will nail it down. I will stick to a schedule. I'll focus. I'll have a good life. I will do this, and it will last for 2 weeks. So I was reading all those books about the brain, like and neuroplasticity, because I was like, this thing I'm gonna conquer. So I was just always pushing myself hard and hard. And so when I got diagnosed, I was a little bit, I felt sad because I'm like, that person you were trying to reach or you felt it was possible to become, it's not possible. So it was sort of also grieving all the dreams because the problem with ADHD is not an inattention. It's just aiming your attention at what you want when you want. We have plenty of attention. We just cannot, for the life of us, focus when we need to.
Hmm.
And so, just always like struggling with that and just knowing that, like it was never possible no matter how many books you read. And also, like, when I reflected back, all my art was speaking about my ADHD. Like Imposter was speaking about my ADHD, and even my graduate thesis, we did a craft talk where we teach writing skill. So I was teaching about how to carve time to write, how to be consistent with your writing schedule. And so I had this craft talk called how to capture an elusive beast. And the elusive beast I was talking about was definitely attention. you know, so it was like hindsight 2020. Why didn't someone stop me and said, "Hey girl, go get you a diagnosis,"
Oh, I
Because
know. Tell me about it. I used to work with binge eating recovery, and often feel like I should go back and contact all of my coaching clients from and tell them like, guess what? We all have ADHD. Now, as a professor, as a teacher, do you see that same thing? Are you able to recognize it in your students who might not be outwardly struggling? Do you feel like you kind of armchair diagnose some of the young people in your classes?
Yeah, I do see when someone is like kind of eyes glazed, not paying attention. So I'm like, are they just tired or is it ADD, like daydreaming? So I always think like that. But I arrange my teaching so it becomes friendly to people with ADHD and autism and all these other issues. And I'm always trying to tell my students because they will like, oh my God, Professor Abdi, I missed this. And they would have a 20, like a long paragraphs of excuses. And I just say, you don't need to explain anything to me. Take care of you and just get back on track when you can, you know. So just providing that space that's free of guilt and shame is very important to me as a educator, which is what I didn't have. I had a teacher once tell me, and when I was taking composition in college, my first composition class, he said, I think you should drop out of college and pursue a like a vocation because higher education is just not for you. And this was the person who was like teaching me how to write, right? And many years later, when I graduated, you know what? I really wanted to write my like an FU letter as a dedication to him. Because I'm like, had I listened, like my Somali stubbornness was like, you don't know a thing about me for you to decide that for me. But had I listened, I would have had a totally different life.
Right? Oh yeah, seriously. That reminds me. So you've talked a little bit about the creativity element too, but what are some of the things you love about your ADHD? I like that. I would say Somali stubbornness goes under there. I call myself I'm oppositional. That's what I like to say.
Yeah, I love that there's no shortage of ideas. With ADD, it's like I wish, would be the perfect job for me is a job where I think up creative solutions to problems and then I move on to the next project. So it's like project management, but for coming up with business ideas. So I'll come in, I'll construct your business from beginning to end because I'll be really energized and excited about it, and then I'll move on to the next. But yeah, for me, it's like I feel like when I was first being treated, like I tried a lot of medication, and the like Strattera was one of the medication I tried, and Strattera stopped my thoughts from going off all the time. It really
Yeah.
calmed me down. But guess what? I realized that I could not write a single poem. Like it suppressed my
I've heard
creativity.
that. Yeah, a lot of artists who sort of go off their meds when it's time for them to really kind of tap into that creative energy. Yeah.
Yeah, so like I'm like no more Strattera for me. It just like I don't want anything like it really helped with my impulsive talk, or just always saying things offhand. Um, but it was not, it was definitely like I would spend hours and hours editing the same sentence. Um, and so that just made me feel very frustrated. So now I'm off stimulants. I'm just taking guanfacine, which is sort of like quiets down sort of for me, the weird thing that as what it does that my provider didn't even expect was that it really helps with the rejection sensitivity dysphoria,
Hmm.
you know, and I don't know why, if it's just me believing that's what it's doing, but yeah, I feel less sensitive to people's comment with guanfacine.
It's funny. I was just at a lecture talking about guanfacine as working with rejection sensitive dysphoria, and I'm not a medical professional by any means, but like it makes sense to me because I know guanfacine is being prescribed more and more to women because of the racing thoughts and like having some sleep issues, especially if you struggle with like waking up in the middle of the night. Guanfacine can really help with just keeping the like the too muchness at bay, right? And I think that
Mm,
rejection sensitive dysphoria also has that, where you sort of go from 0 to 100 with that social anxiety of like, oh my goodness, they're not getting back to me, did I do something to offend them, or all of that. A lot of that comes from the catastrophizing and the racing thoughts and the constantly ruminating about things. So
yeah,
it makes sense that a medication like guanfacine would help with that. So yeah, interesting.
yeah. So yeah, yeah, I love ADD for the creativity. I feel like it informs a lot of who I am and also what I like is being able to have empathy, like always know what's going on, like read the room, how people are feeling, be sensitive to that. Um, and just always like I feel like my ethics come from the fact that I'm sensitive. Like I don't want to feel this way, so I'm never going to cause other people to feel bad or put them in situations where they will suffer emotionally because of situation I created. So I feel like I am nicer person because of that.
Yeah, that's so true. I feel that way too. I feel that way with my kids, especially. Have like an abundance of empathy. I'm almost like trying to get them to get a bit of a thicker skin as they get older. How old are your kids? They're teenagers?
I do not have
Oh,
kids,
you don't
but
have
yeah,
kids. Okay.
yeah.
I thought I read that you had a daughter, but maybe it was the metaphorical in one of your poems.
Yes. I write a lot of poetry to my future children, just
Oh,
sort of
that's
like,
beautiful.
yeah.
Now, if I love to ask if you could call ADHD something else, would you rename it?
Oh, there's this talk about doctors, Ned Hallowell and others, about calling it vast,
Vast, yeah.
variable attention, what was it,
Stimulus
stimulus
trait.
trait,
Hmm.
which I feel like, first it takes out the disorder out of there. Yeah, for sure, it can be a disabling thing for people if it's not managed well or if they go through trauma. So yeah, it can be a disorder for someone, but it's not for everyone. And also the fact that it talks about it being variable, like our attention is variable, so I can focus today on something and tomorrow not give a crap about it. And so just having understanding that part of it really helps me. So that I feel like that would be like a good name for it and a less stigmatizing name for it.
Right? I almost sometimes I feel like we should come up with two separate names. One that's a name for the brain, which a lot of us use the term neurodivergent, right? And it's just this idea that there's like a name for the kind of brain or the sensitive wiring or highly, that there's a way to refer to the brain and how you think in one way that's not stigmatizing. But then on the other hand, there is the disorder element, which is if left untreated or if you're in a hostile environment or, if it's not managed or not, respected, then it turns into these,
Yeah,
what
I
did your
love
teacher
that.
call it, right? Troublemaker, where it's like, you're not a troublemaker. But
I'm
you
just
can
extremely
see.
eager.
Right, but you can see how with your teacher calling you a troublemaker, your mother's reaction was, "Oh no, how do we stop this? How do we get JoJo to behave?" Right? So it's like it starts this cycle of pulling yourself back and trying to conform and trying to not be who you are because who you are is somehow inadvertently offensive to people. And it's like I don't even have the time or energy to figure out what I did that offended you, but I'm just going to try to not do that again, right? And so then it becomes all of this behavior management where you didn't even really need to behavior management. You really didn't even need it in the first place. But
Yeah, yeah.
anyway, I'm like getting too. I'm like sometimes when you're like
Ex-
talking so fast, I can't even get the words out.
I know that feeling. I know because I did have experience with teachers who actually embraced my and actually directed it to another source. They'd be like, "Here, do this side project," and I'll be so busy that I would not distract other kids.
Right.
Um, and it depends on how the teachers deal with me. And because I was so close in age with my sister, I went to school with her, and teachers will always compare, like, she's calm, she gets homework done on time, she has really neat handwriting, you know. And then there was me, and um, it's just like that was for me, like, I knew from early on, like, how adults experience me was not good. Um, and and instead of just kind of like when I was younger and I didn't know better, I knew better. I fought against that, but then later I just kind of went along and suppressed. And then even later on, I just kind of completely exited the classroom. Like I was like building characters in my head. I was daydreaming. I was gone for like and and then like my school was suffering. My education was really bad. And what really saved me was in high school, I was almost failing every class. And my high school counselor was like, here, she put me in a program that's used by migrant children of migrant farm workers, and because it was self-study, because I was always distracted by other students. Like someone would be twirling their pencil or playing with their hair, and that would take me away for like 20 minutes. So when she put me in this, I was self-studying. Like I'll get like a few booklets. I'll go home with them. I'll fill them out. I'll study. I'll read the books and I'll return them. And I'll sit in a room somewhere, take a quiz, and you wouldn't believe it. I had like A's and B's, like the highest grade. And I was like way ahead when I could do self-study, when I wasn't being distracted by other students. Like I was thriving, you know.
Right? It's just amazing if you just take a little bit of attention from the teacher in terms of like what does this child need, right? And then and to think about now you as a teacher, how that one student who missed a deadline or something and came to you with all of this shame and guilt and sadness, you were able to like destigmatize that and to be an accepting voice in her life. What a change that makes.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's just that's my aim now, is to just make um because I felt like some teachers were like really making it hard for the students, like putting up hurdles. And when just living life is hard enough, especially now, school is so expensive. Kids are working to be able to afford college. Some of them are parents. Some of them are dealing with depression, and they're just like getting up from bed. It takes all their energy. And so it's not enough. It's very unethical as educators for them to be expecting that they perform, you know, on par with everyone else when they don't, when they carry backpacks loaded with more burden than other students, have. So we just need to have a movement of looking at students holistically, looking at the homes they're coming from, the social situations they're coming from, like what they're dealing with in their personal lives, and then see their education through that lens. If they're struggling, identify them early and then refer them to like tutoring and other resources as much as you can do.
Here, here. I agree. I'm listening to that book, "Laziness Does Not Exist" by Dr. Devin Price right now. So good. But he, talks about that idea of the fact that like the people who are struggling are the least lazy among us, right? They are the ones who are working, extra jobs and doing all of these. I love how you said their backpack is heavier. That's so true. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much, JoJo. It's wonderful I've loved getting to interview and you hear your story. Now, is there a way we can share some of your poetry? Do you have a website or how can people find out more about you?
I have a couple of manuscripts that I've been trying to publish, so I'm looking for publishers. So the ones that are published, you can find them in a link tree that's on my Instagram. So it's if you find it through the handle of Miss JoJo AB, which MZ JoJo and then AB. So click on that link tree. It will take you to my secret blog, that, and also a few of my published poems. So yeah, I'm trying to find a book agent and find ways to publish my poetry, and also a couple of novels that I have.
Ooh, perfect. Okay, well, I'll definitely put a link to that in the episode show notes too. All right. Well, thank you so much. This has just been absolutely wonderful. I really appreciated your perspective.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for having a space where all of us can chime in our stories, so somebody can say, "Me too, I've been through that."
Oh,
And I just want to tell the ladies who listen to um, yeah, just know that you're not alone, and we're all going through it together.
oh, beautifully said. Thank you, JoJo.
Thank you so much.